You awaken beneath furs that smell of smoke and horse sweat. The tent around you breathes like a living creature, its hide walls swelling and snapping under the wind that howls across the endless steppe. Outside, drums pound in uneven rhythm, mingled with bursts of laughter and the snorting of restless horses. A shaman's voice rises and falls, chanting words you don't yet understand. You've been told this night will bind you to your husband, will make you part of the tribe, but the faces surrounding you say otherwise. The elders stand close silent, watchful, holding whips and ritual blades polished to a cold gleam. The air tastes of blood and fermented milk. Above, horse skulls dangle like trophies from the tent's beams, their hollow eyes glinting with firelight. The laughter outside dies into a hush. What begins as a wedding ceremony transforms into a test, a ritual of proof, witnessed by men who call cruelty, tradition, and obedience virtue. Before gold crowns Europe, before Rome itself, there were the Scythians, lords of the steppe. Their legend speaks of freedom, of untamed riders and burning horizons. But hidden beneath that legend lay another law, one older than kings, a law written in fear and sealed in the blood of brides. If these glimpses into forgotten shadows grip you, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. It fuels more excavations like this. The Scythians ruled a world without borders, a sea of grass stretching from the Black Sea to the edges of Central Asia. From the 9th century before Christ until Rome's rise, their name carried both awe and dread. They were nomads, warriors, traders, slavers, priests of the horse and bow. Yet behind their reputation for freedom stood a structure, precise, ritualized, and systematic. Their wedding rites were no accidents of savagery. They were deliberate institutions, blending war, economy, and faith into a single mechanism of control. Chronicles from Herodotus speak of them with fascination and unease. Archaeological digs at Pazyryk reveal altars stained with iron and bone. Burial inventories list wives as property alongside weapons and gold. In the Scythian world, intimacy was not love, it was policy. A woman's body was both a battlefield and a border. The tent collapses into darkness, but the memory of that night will never fade. For the Scythians, marriage was not the beginning of companionship, it was conquest repeated on a smaller scale. Each union mirrored the wars that had carved their empire from the horizon, swift, violent, and systematic. To understand them, you must abandon every notion of romance. A Scythian wedding was not a meeting of equals, it was the continuation of war by other means. Each spring, when the grass turned green and horses grew restless, the tribes prepared for what the chroniclers euphemistically called the season of union. In the songs of their ancestors, it was remembered as the bride hunt. To outsiders, it appeared theatrical, a pageant of mock abductions, galloping riders chasing laughing maidens across the plains. But beneath that veneer of ritual play lay a machinery of fear. Families knew which daughters would be taken that year, their names quietly traded between elders like coins. Fathers offered feigned resistance, mothers wept as custom demanded, and the young men, half drunk on fermented mare's milk, half hypnotized by duty, rode out to claim their prize. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, hinted that these acts were considered honorable, a test of manhood. Yet the Greek historian's tone betrays unease. A Scythian does not wed without combat, he wrote, but never described what became of the girl who lost. To the tribe, she became the spoils of a ritualized war, a symbol of alliance, an object of exchange, a guarantee that one clan's blood would merge with another's. But behind the language of unity lay something colder, possession. The Scythians were masters of logistics as much as they were masters of the bow. Every raid, every union, every birth was recorded, systematic to the bone. Tribal elders kept ledgers carved into bone tablets or burned onto wooden sticks, listing livestock, weapon counts, and women. 5 mares, 1 iron blade, 1 maiden of 15 summers, reads one reconstructed inventory, discovered in a burial mound near modern-day Crimea. Such inscriptions turn flesh into arithmetic. The girl becomes a unit of wealth, her worth measured not in love or life, but in horses. When the abduction ended, the true ritual began. The marriage took place before the tribe, under the eyes of elders and shamans. The bride, stripped of family and name, stood surrounded by witnesses who would attest to her transformation from girl to woman, from individual to property. This act, euphemistically known as the Night of the Spear, symbolized the uniting of clans. But for the woman, it was a public trial of purity and submission. Blood was demanded as proof. To the Scythians, the absence of it meant deceit, curse, or witchcraft. In burial chambers excavated in Pozoric and Chertomlik, archaeologists found altars smeared with dried iron residue, the chemical signature of blood long vanished. Nearby lay bronze knives, decorative but still sharp, and small clay vessels used in purification rites. The proximity of these artifacts to female remains tells its own story. These were not tools of ornamentation. They were instruments of assurance, evidence that the tribe had performed its duty to the gods and to its own brutal order. Witnesses spoke of the cries of brides echoing through the night as elders recited blessings. For the men, this was sanctity; for the women, erasure. Afterwards, the bride was confined in silence, forbidden to speak or leave her tent for days. Her attendants, usually older women who had endured the same ordeal, watched her closely, not out of sympathy, but to ensure she did not flee. When she emerged, she bore marks, tattoos inked with soot and horse fat, geometric lines tracing her arms and chest. Each symbol represented ownership, fertility, endurance. It was the Scythian equivalent of a seal. Yet even this was not the end. Over the months that followed, her body was monitored with the same precision as livestock. Pregnancy was expected, failure was recorded. Surviving ledgers describe fertility tallies. How many brides conceived, how many miscarried, how many bore male issue fit for riding. The tribe rewarded women who birthed sons with ornaments, sometimes small silver plaques of horses or deer. But those who bore daughters too frequently were shamed, whispered to be cursed or barren of spirit. The pressure was relentless, psychological warfare disguised as religious duty. It was systematic, cold, and efficient. Nothing was left to chance. Even the rituals of mourning tied back into this machinery. If a husband died in battle, the wife was expected to accompany him into death. Excavations of Scythian burial mounds frequently reveal pairs of skeletons, one armored, one adorned with jewelry. The woman's bones often show no signs of trauma, suggesting she was strangled or poisoned quietly before interment. To the tribe, it was devotion. To history, it was murder woven into myth. Some sources suggest that wives were buried alive, trapped inside chambers with the bodies of their husbands, their screams muffled by packed earth. A Pozoric mound revealed a pair in which the man's remains were fully preserved, but the woman's skull bore traces of soil inhalation, evidence that she lived for minutes after burial. Even in death, intimacy was weaponized. Every aspect of Scythian life revolved around domination masked as destiny. The men were raised to believe that control was holiness, the women, that submission was survival. Together, these beliefs sustained a society where cruelty was law and law was love. And all of it, every scar, every ledger line was done in the name of the tribe's continuity, their gods, and their pride. The Scythians called themselves the Sons of the Wind. Their warriors were said to be born in the saddle, their arrows faster than thought. Yet behind this myth of freedom was a deep, enduring slavery, to ritual, to hierarchy, to inherited fear. In their world, the chain did not always clink like iron. Sometimes, it sounded like laughter outside a wedding tent. But this machinery did not exist in isolation. It was part of a broader systematic order that governed every relationship within the Scythian Confederation. Women were not merely brides, they were a form of currency in the political economy of the steppe. A tribe's power was measured not only in horses and warriors, but in the number of women it could exchange. A single noblewoman could secure a truce between warring clans or ignite a conflict if her value was disputed. Trade caravans that crossed the steppe often carried not just spices and furs, but human beings. Captives from raids in Thrace, the Caucasus, and even Persia were brought into Scythian camps, where they were absorbed into this system of marriage and servitude. Some were forced into concubinage, others were gifted to warriors as rewards for valor. Chroniclers describe a practice chilling in its efficiency. Captives were paraded before tribal elders, who categorized them by age, appearance, and potential fertility. Each was assigned a price in horses, gold, or weapons. The entries read like warehouse inventories. 15 women, ages 14 to 20, strong build, excellent health. This industrial-scale dehumanization extended beyond the individual. Entire families were dismantled to maintain the illusion of tribal strength. Children born of captured mothers were given new names, stripped of origin, and raised as Scythians. The mothers themselves were forbidden to speak their native tongue again. Punishments for defiance included branding, mutilation, or being left bound in the open plains for wolves. One record fragmentary, written in Greek by a traveler near the Black Sea, mentions a chilling scene. They tie her hair to a horse's tail and let it run until the scalp comes away. To the Scythians, this was not sadism but spectacle, a message to others that the law of the tribe superseded the law of the heart. Fear was the glue that held the steppe together. Yet not all who participated believed. Some Scythian women, particularly those descended from warrior lineages, resisted in secret. There are accounts of women donning armor, riding into battle disguised as men, later deified in local legend as the Amazons. These tales, half history, half myth, reveal a deeper truth. Resistance was part of the same systematic structure. The rebellion of one generation became the justification for harsher control over the next. Psychological warfare seeped into every layer of daily life. Shamans preached that disobedient brides brought droughts, and that only ritual correction could restore harmony. During the winter months, when snow blanketed the steppes and resources thinned, these corrections grew crueler. Women accused of infidelity or infertility were made to stand naked before the tribe as their hair was burned, symbolizing purification. The irony is unbearable. The fire that seared their skin was called the flame of renewal. The Scythians turned belief itself into a weapon. Their gods demanded sacrifice not through slaughter, but through endurance. To suffer was to be chosen, and so suffering became sacred. This moral inversion allowed horror to become routine. It is perhaps the most terrifying feature of their world. Not the blood, not the knives, but the ease with which cruelty became invisible. Archaeologists have unearthed conversion centers, wooden enclosures where captives were initiated into Scythian life. Iron shackles, incense burners, and carved horse effigies litter the sites. Chemical analysis of soil samples found traces of animal blood mixed with human remains, suggesting ceremonies that blurred the line between ritual and punishment. These were the factories of identity, churning out obedient members of a tribe that prided itself on freedom. In time, even neighboring civilizations took note. Persian records refer to the Scythians as those who make wives of the conquered. Greek poets romanticized them as fierce lovers and wild horsemen, never seeing the pain beneath the poetry. When Scythian influence spread westward, traces of their customs seeped into other cultures. Bride abductions, proof of purity, rites, and the conflation of female virtue with family honor. These echoes still resonate today in folklore from the Balkans to Mongolia. The stolen bride, the trial of blood. The legend outlived the empire, and through it all, the Scythians documented everything. Their scribes, priests of order in a world of chaos, kept records of who was taken, who was married, who was born. They noted deaths like accountants of despair. One partial ledger recovered near the Dniester River lists casualties and livestock losses alongside women's names replaced with symbols, triangles, circles, slashes. It is a grim taxonomy of humanity, reducing generations to geometry. When we read these marks today, they appear abstract, meaningless. But to those who lived them, they were a language of pain, each cut a memory, each sign a story never told aloud. And that is how the Scythians maintained their dominion, not through brute force alone, but through the quiet efficiency of administration. Every atrocity justified, every humiliation archived, every act of resistance buried beneath bureaucracy. By the time Greek colonies began trading freely with Scythian chieftains, this order had become unshakable. Young brides no longer screamed on their wedding nights, they wept in silence, convinced it was their duty. Mothers instructed daughters how to survive, how to appear obedient while keeping fragments of their true selves hidden. Fathers turned away, telling themselves that this was strength, that pain made their tribe endure. In the end, the Scythians became victims of their own system. As their confederation fractured, the very customs that once unified them turned into chains. Alliances built on forced unions crumbled into vengeance. Raids between clans became common, each side claiming ancestral rights over the same women. The steppe, once bound by ritual, dissolved into chaos. And yet, the ideology endured. Even after their decline, centuries later, the nomads who followed, the Sarmatians, the Alans, adopted many of the same practices, changing names but not essence. The machinery outlived its makers. The system, once systematic, had become instinct. So when you imagine the Scythians, the Golden Horsemen, the Lords of Endless Plains, remember this: their freedom was built on captivity. Their songs of glory were sung over the cries of the bound. And their wedding nights, immortalized in myth, were not celebrations of love but confirmations of power. Theirs was a civilization that turned intimacy into empire, and empire into silence. By the time the Scythian Confederation reached its height, their customs had evolved into something vast, an invisible machine of order, ancient and terrifying in its efficiency. What had begun as scattered tribal rites of dominance became a coherent system, codified, regulated, enforced by faith and ledger alike. In the wind-beaten plains stretching from the Danube to the Altai, one law ruled above all others: nothing must break the cycle. Each generation was born into the system as if it were a natural law. The abduction of brides, the public proof, the control of womb and lineage, none of it was seen as cruelty. It was duty. The elders called it tarka, the binding, a word that meant both marriage and sacrifice. From childhood, every Scythian learned its weight. Boys were trained to see compassion as weakness. They were told that the gods of the steppe sky father Papaios and hearth mother Tabiti had bound creation through pain, that love itself was only purified through suffering. Girls were raised to accept pain as the proof of virtue. A bride who did not bleed was an omen, a threat to the tribe's harmony. It was systematic and therefore unquestionable. The more their empire expanded, the more elaborate this machinery became. Alliances between clans were sealed through mass weddings. Hundreds of women traded like horses in a single night of ceremony. Entire valleys glowed with firelight as tents filled the horizon. Drums rolled for hours, their rhythm meant to imitate the gallop of divine horses. Chroniclers describe these nights as both festival and factory. Ritualized chaos, carefully organized by the elders. Each union was logged by scribes who carried scrolls inked with soot and animal fat. They noted names, dowries, and fertility expectations, sometimes adding remarks like strong hips, quiet, or uncertain blood. The cruelty lay not in passion, but in precision. One fragment of a Scythian trade record, preserved by Greek merchants in Olbia, lists 4 mares, 2 iron swords, and 1 woman of Thracian stock, unproven. It is the language of inventory, the speech of accountants cataloging despair. By now, the machinery no longer needed brutality to function. Fear had done its work generations earlier. People obeyed not out of terror, but belief. The tarka had become sacred, its violence reinterpreted as a symbol of order. The shamanic priests reinforced it through ritual theater, masked figures reenacting abductions in sacred plays, dancers mimicking struggle and surrender before the roaring crowds. Each performance reminded the audience that pain was divine balance. In these festivals, young boys were chosen to watch and learn. Their initiation came when they reenacted the same rituals on wooden effigies shaped like women preparation for the night they would take living brides. It was indoctrination disguised as art. Archaeologists have found carvings showing couples locked in ritual poses, surrounded by spiraling animal motifs, horses, eagles, serpents devouring themselves. These were not scenes of love but allegories of dominance and submission, the eternal chase. In Scythian belief, life was a circle of hunter and hunted. And in marriage, that circle closed. The horror is not in the violence itself, but in how beautifully it was justified. Every cut, every command, every silence was draped in the language of holiness. The elders spoke of equilibrium, the shamans spoke of destiny, the warriors spoke of honor. None spoke of choice. To sustain this illusion, the Scythians built what historians now call the reproductive economy of the steppe. Women became both vessels of lineage and tools of diplomacy. When a noble chieftain wished to prove loyalty to another, he offered a daughter, her life converted into political stability. If the alliance faltered, she was the first casualty. Some were returned beaten and mutilated, Others never returned at all. The elders recorded these as sacrifices to the gods of wind. It was systematic, relentless, and self-perpetuating. The steppe didn't run on cruelty. It ran on conviction. That made it invincible, and that is what made it monstrous. As the centuries passed, the Scythian system reached its most terrifying perfection. It no longer required chains. It lived inside the mind. The same women who had once been victims became enforcers. Mothers instructed daughters on how to survive their wedding nights, what to say, what to hide, how to endure without screaming. They became archivists of silence, passing down techniques for obedience disguised as wisdom. This was the final stage of the systematic machine, when resistance itself became fuel. Shame was weaponized so thoroughly that it transformed into virtue. A woman who did not protest was praised as strong. A man who did not hesitate was celebrated as honorable. Through this alchemy, cruelty was turned into morality, and morality into tradition, but not all accepted it quietly. Within the oral histories of the Scythian plains survive whispers of those who defied the order, small, flickering rebellions that history almost erased. A daughter of a chieftain, refusing her arranged union, supposedly cut her hair and led a band of warriors into exile near the Dniester. Legends say she founded a tribe of women who swore never to wed, their tents marked by crimson banners. The Greeks would later mythologize them as the Amazons. But their existence, half truth, half myth, was itself an indictment of what the Scythian world had become. Still, the machine adapted. What it could not kill, it absorbed. The stories of rebellious women were retold as cautionary tales. Those who defied the sacred law were said to wander cursed, barren, or transformed into beasts. A system that can rewrite its dissenters into monsters has reached its ultimate perfection. And so, it endured. The abductions continued. The proofs continued. The ledgering of bodies continued. Each cycle fed the next, until the horror became invisible, woven into lullabies, prayers, and customs too old to question. Then came the turning point, the Scythians' contact with the Persians and Greeks. For the first time, outsiders looked upon their practices with revulsion. Herodotus wrote with fascination, but the Persians called them the blood riders, a people who bind their daughters in darkness and call it sanctity. Yet even this external judgment did not end the system. It only forced it deeper underground, into the private sphere, where it grew more intimate, more psychological. The greatest cruelty of all was the normalization. When violence becomes custom, its victims become believers. When control becomes love, its executioners become fathers. That is how civilizations rot from within, quietly, elegantly, systematically. Over time, as Scythian power fractured and their language dissolved into those of successor tribes, the Sarmatians, the Alans, the early Turks, the rituals remained. Modified, reinterpreted, renamed, but never truly dead. Even medieval chroniclers in Eastern Europe described wedding night tests eerily similar to the Tarka proofs of purity, public humiliations, the branding of brides. The forms changed, the logic endured. Pause and consider this. An empire can crumble to dust, its palaces lost, its language forgotten. Yet the echo of its cruelties can live for millennia in the customs of its descendants. That is the true power of a systematic horror. It does not vanish, it mutates. In the end, the Scythians' tragedy was not only what they did, but what they taught the world to accept. By sanctifying control, they gave humanity one of its oldest justifications for domination, that suffering purifies, that pain proves worth. It is a poison that seeps into every age, wearing new masks: religion, law, honor, love. Their steppe empire vanished beneath the hooves of new conquerors, their gold buried under layers of soil. But the silence of their brides remains, echoing across time. Each time a culture measures virtue through pain, each time a woman's worth is tested, each time obedience is dressed as purity, the shadow of the Scythian tent rises again, and in that shadow, the drums still beat the rhythm of a civilization that perfected the art of control and mistook it for faith. The wind across the steppe is quieter now. The great tents have rotted into soil, the horses long turned to bone, and the drums that once shook the horizon are nothing but whispers in the grass. Yet if you stand in those plains today, somewhere between the Dnieper and the Don, you can still feel it, a pulse beneath the earth, faint but insistent. The memory of what was done here never truly died. Archaeologists uncover it bone by bone. In burial mounds scattered across Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and southern Russia, they find pairs of skeletons, warrior and bride, husband and offering. The gold ornaments that once gleamed on their bodies are now blackened with time, but the order of things remains visible. The woman always lies beneath. Sometimes her fingers are curled toward his armor, as if clinging for protection that never came. In one grave, an iron knife rests beside her rib cage, a relic of that night of proof. Even in death, the ritual remained whole. But what endures more powerfully than relics is the echo of belief. The Scythians vanished, yet their patterns lived on, absorbed by tribes that came after them. The Sarmatians, the Alans, the early Turkic steppe peoples, all carried fragments of that logic: purity as ownership, pain as sanctity, love as conquest. Over centuries, it traveled farther still, hidden in proverbs, in folklore, in the way families whispered about duty and honor. The idea that a woman's suffering could define her worth, that, more than any empire, is the Scythians' true legacy. Civilizations collapse when their cruelty becomes invisible. The Scythians did not think of themselves as monsters. They believed they were preserving balance, honoring gods, strengthening the tribe. But cruelty, once ritualized, becomes indistinguishable from faith. And that is the most terrifying lesson the past can give us, that the line between devotion and domination is thinner than wind over grass. Somewhere in those endless plains, beneath centuries of dust, their archives still sleep ledgers of lives catalogued like livestock, carved in bone, written in languages no one speaks. They are the bureaucratic ghosts of a forgotten tyranny, preserved with tax scroll precision, waiting for the world to look again. So remember them. Remember the brides of the steppe, the silenced witnesses of a system that turned intimacy into empire. Their names may be gone, but the echo of their voices endures in every culture that once believed obedience was virtue. If this history stirs you to vigilance, subscribe and share what part struck you hardest, because the next shadow we unearth may not be ancient at all. It may be the one we're still living in,